Welcome to Nightville, where every shadow hides a secret.
I entered the elevator alone, exhausted and ready to go home. After spending the past few hours doing overtime to finish all my paperwork, I wanted nothing more than to plop on my bed and rest. My trip home was supposed to be uneventful, just like any other night. However, as I stood there in the elevator and watched the numbers on the display go down, I was surprised to see it go past the ground floor and continue its descent. Initially, I wasn't too concerned. It was just a minor inconvenience. At least, and that's what I thought at first. And being in a faulty elevator was not good, but I thought that the worst that could happen was for it to head to the basement floor. In that event, all I had to do was get off and take the stairs up, because I sure wasn't going to stick around on a broken elevator. But when I saw the numbers on the display continue to go down, rocket past the basement and reach negative numbers, I gradually realized that something was terribly wrong. Staring at the display with wide eyes, I felt shock and fear mix within me. I then began to wonder if it was some kind of computer glitch. It seemed like the logical reason, because I was sure that elevators were not meant to display negative numbers. But it couldn't be just a glitch. I could feel the elevator continue its descent, going down and down, to floors that I didn't even know existed in the building. I wondered how this was even possible. Wasn't the basement floor supposed to be the last one? Were there other floors that weren't listed here? This worried me a lot, and I could feel the panic within me rise. Where was it going? How was it even possible? These thoughts bombarded my mind as I watched the display tell me that I was in the negative 88th floor. Scared, I pressed the emergency button, but to no avail. It remained silent, giving no alarm to the current situation that I was in. Frustrated, I pushed it again. Once more, it gave no reaction. Realizing that it was useless to try and make it work, I quickly decided to press the button for the emergency phone, but that too failed. Instead of connecting me to someone who could help me, it just remained silent, almost mocking me as I stood there and continuously pressed it. Slamming my hands on the control panel, I let out an angry growl as I realized nothing in this elevator was working properly. Suddenly feeling desperate, I decided to grab my phone, hoping to call a friend who might inform the building's management about my predicament. However, as I stared at the device, I felt my heart drop upon seeing that there was no signal. However, despite what my phone was telling me, I still dared try to call, but the result was predictable. I couldn't get through to anyone. At that point, it dawned upon me that there was no device there that could help me contact the outside world. Left without any other option, I foolishly screamed for help, letting my voice echo in the elevator. I hoped that maybe my plea would be able to penetrate the depth and reach someone's ear. "Help!" I shouted. "Please help me, I'm trapped in here." With each yell, I prayed that somebody would hear me and bring aid. But how would they? If the display was to be believed, then I was 2,000 floors underground. Who was to hear me that far down? I was too scared to think clearly, so I continued to scream. In the end, all I was able to do was exhaust myself and further lower my spirit. Slowly, I was starting to accept that I was trapped and alone in that elevator, with no way of contacting anyone for help. With dread, I slowly glanced at the elevator display to see that I was already at the negative 2,500th floor. Looking on with a feeling of shock and defeat, I wondered how long would I continue to go down. The descent seemed to endlessly continue, and all I could do was watch on, frozen in horror, as the numbers passed by in front of me. Inside, I prayed, hoping for this nightmare to end, hoping that what I was seeing was not true. yet it continued, ignoring my internal pleas. I could feel my head spin as the minutes went on and on. Standing there alone, I thought that any second I would fall and collapse from the overwhelming emotions raging within me. The fact that the elevator reached floors that would have been deep underground terrified me. I couldn't even see how far down I was. All I had to rely on was the numbers being displayed to me. I had no way of confirming if what it was saying was true, but deep inside of me I knew that it was. The numbers just kept on going down, and all I wanted was for it to stop. Eventually it did stop. However, it did little to calm my nerves. Glancing at the elevator display, I looked down with dread to see that it said that I was in the negative at 3,000th floor. If that was true, then I would have to be deep within the Earth's crust. Yet it didn't seem that I was. This far underground, it should have felt hotter, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it felt the same as when I had first entered the elevator. It was cool and the air was easy to breathe. I then wondered if any of the laws of nature still applied in that elevator, or if the elevator's ventilation system was just that good. Recovering from the initial fear that paralyzed me, I eventually turned my attention towards the doors. Instead of opening, they remained closed, leaving me trapped in there and nowhere to go. However, remembering where I was, I wondered if it was better that it remained closed. If it opened, would I find some kind of room deep underground? Or would tons of dirt and rock just enter the small space that I was in and crush me to death? I was too scared to find out. So I made sure to not press anything on the control panel that would make it open. But what was I to do? Was I supposed to just wait there, wait for what? Will the elevator go back up, or will it suddenly just go down again? How much further could it descend if it did go down even more? Will something else happen, or would I just remain trapped here until I die? Was this thing taking me to hell, or has it brought me there already? All these questions raged in my head, yet there seemed to be no answer. Frustrated and confused, I then tried to find meaning to why I was there. It wasn't like I had anything better to do after all. For some reason, a part of me needed to know why I was chosen for that. I needed to know the reason that I was unlucky enough to be here. I thought that maybe if I found the answer to that, then I could also find the path to my escape. I felt like there was an answer somewhere and I had to look for it, yet I didn't know where I could begin the search. After all, what was there to see inside a plain elevator? Looking around, I did my best to find any sign or hint, but there was nothing. All I could see was these stainless steel walls of the elevator and my frantic reflection. As the minutes went by, I realized that I would find nothing. All I was doing was wasting time. I was just simply trapped here with no means to get out. I was just unlucky enough to be in the elevator at the wrong time. There was no greater meaning. Feeling defeated, I then slumped on the wall and I allowed myself to slide down until I was sitting on the floor. Then, as I felt a wave of sadness hit me, I buried my face in my hands and I began to sob. Never in my life had I expected something like this to happen to me. How could have anyone predicted such a cruel thing to happen to them? I didn't know why I was here or who chose me to be the victim of this cruel game. All I knew was that I was trapped here, wherever this elevator ended up at. For the next few moments, I remained like that, frightened and feeling sorry for myself. However, eventually my sorrow had turned into frustration, as I felt that I was cheated on by life and left abandoned. Deep inside, it felt like I won some kind of cosmic lottery, and I had been awarded with the prize of torment. Feeling the frustration overcome me, I ended up clenching my fist before looking up at the ceiling. As I stared up, I wondered if there was somebody out there looking down at me, as if an unknown being that had allowed me to be in this situation was watching me like I was a rat in an experiment. Thinking of that furthered the frustration in me as I gazed with a foul expression. Unable to keep it in me any longer, I suddenly let out a curse, screaming to the top of my lungs. The frustration was too much, and it soon turned into full-blown anger. "Come on," I shouted as I felt my blood boil. "Why? Why me?" Allowing the anger to get the best of me, I started to lose control and began throwing a fit in the elevator. My anger was mainly directed at the entity, or the trick of fate that had allowed me to be trapped here. Out of all the people in the world, they chose me. I wanted them to know that I was displeased by their decision. "To whoever is listening, screw you," I yelled. "Let me out of here, I don't deserve this. You hear me? Bring me back up, but listen to me." Of course, I was met with no reply. Nobody responded or gave a hint that I was being heard. I was only met with silence as the elevator remained unmoving. This only served to anger me even more, as I began stomping my feet on the floor, making the elevator shake as I increased the force. "Let me out! Bring me back!" I cried out. Feeling my rage continue to rise, I soon began banging on the walls until all that could be heard was the sound of metal being struck in that confined space. In that moment, I was blinded by emotions. I was scared and I was angry. I no longer cared where the elevator could be. All caution was gone by that point. I no longer cared that it could be deep underground and that my actions could cause the doors to open and allow the earth to bury me. I no longer cared and simply allowed my emotions to act for me. Banging on the walls, kicking the door and shouting, I went wild in there. At one point, I began slamming my hands on the control panel, hitting multiple buttons as I did so. While most of the buttons that I bumped did nothing to change my situation, the one that was to open the door somehow did. The moment that my fist pressed it, the elevator doors made a screeching sound, making me pause and step back. Turning my attention to the door, I watched with surprise and apprehension as it slowly parted and it opened. However, instead of a mountain of dirt and rock pouring in, what I saw confused me. As my anger subsided, I backed away and I stared at what the door revealed. Right there in front of me was a rough concrete wall with a small rectangular opening at its center. Relieved that I wasn't going to be buried to death, but still cautious at the strange sight in front of me, I kept my distance and I stayed at one corner of the elevator, keeping my eyes intently at the small opening. I did my best to prepare myself for anything that might happen. I feared that at any moment something would come crawling out of that opening. I was terrified as I stood there. I knew that if something did come out, I wondered what I was supposed to do. I had nothing to fight with aside from my fist. If something did come out, I would be helpless against it. However, as luck would have it, nothing emerged from the opening. As these seconds turned into minutes, it soon became clear that nothing was going to happen. At least, nothing immediately. Allowing myself to relax for a moment, I ended up lost in thought, as I wondered what to do with the new situation presented to me. As I studied the opening from a distance, I couldn't help but entertain the idea that it may be the key to my escape. If anything else, it was at least a path that might lead to any other place than the elevator. From my initial observations, it was obvious that I could squeeze myself into the opening and crawl into the tunnel that it led to. It would have been a tight fit, and I never was a fan of small spaces, but in that desperate moment, I was willing to do it. But the question then was, where would it lead to? I hoped that it would lead back to the surface, but after the distance that I've traveled in the elevator, I realized that if it did, then it would be a long journey. I then wondered how I would be able to survive such a trip without any supplies. After a short debate, I eventually convinced myself that the risk of a long journey without supplies had a better chance of success than staying in the elevator and dying from starvation and dehydration. And being stagnant was going to get me nowhere. Besides, I also hoped for the possibility that the tunnel would lead me to another room, one that would perhaps provide me with either food and water or a quicker way back up to the surface. After all that I had been through that day, such a possibility didn't seem too far-fetched to me at the time. It was worth the risk. Moving closer to the opening and trying to peer into it, I tried my best to see how far into the tunnel I could see. The light from the elevator only illuminated a few feet from the opening. After that, it was pure pitch-black darkness. And taking out my phone, I then opened its flashlight and I tried to shine it into the tunnel. That helped light up a few more feet, but once again there was nothing but a void of darkness, hiding anything else further. Sighing, I took a deep breath and I tried to gather all the courage within me. This was my only chance and I knew that I had to take it. Checking my phone, I saw that it still had more than 50% of power left. I hoped and prayed that it would be enough until I reached another lit room or wherever this tunnel led to. With some hesitation, I lifted myself into the entrance and after a brief struggle to get my whole body in, I began crawling forward deeper into the tunnel. Since it was impossible to hold the phone pointing forward while I crawled inside the cramped confine, I decided to keep it held in one hand with the flashlight on. That way I was able to somewhat illuminate the surrounding area and see what was directly in front of me. And despite this, I began to feel some panic as I moved through the cold concrete small passageway. Crawling inside a narrow tunnel wasn't exactly something that I was comfortable doing, especially when I didn't know where exactly it would lead me. Looking forward and trying my best to see what was ahead, I could feel a sense of dread in my stomach at seeing nothing but darkness ahead of me. As it turns out, the light that I had was barely any help at all. It seemed that having the flashlight on was no better than having it off, since I couldn't illuminate far enough to allow better navigation. However, the moment I turned off the flashlight to try and save battery, I quickly realized that the sensation of being in complete darkness while inside a confined space made things much more difficult. In the complete dark, I felt vulnerable, more vulnerable than I already was. It's hard to describe the uncomfortable feeling I felt in that moment of darkness, but it felt strange and unnerving. For some reason, it seemed that the moment the light was gone, I sensed the feeling that somebody was watching me. The thought of that brought a chill down my spine as I desperately looked around in the dark. The sensation of being watched grew with every second passed, and it eventually made me stop and turn on the flashlight again. Looking ahead of me and with some difficulty towards my rear also, I saw that there was no one there. Yet I was certain that I was being watched earlier. Bothered by this, I felt that urge to turn back, but I fought it and decided to continue. My only salvation was forward, and I told myself that I couldn't give up. With one last glance at my surroundings, I turned off the flashlight and moved forward. The moment the darkness engulfed me again, the feeling of being watched returned. However, I knew that I had to ignore it and do my best to fight the urge to turn on the light again. In the end, I managed to convince myself that I had to conserve power for more important situations. So on I went, crawling into the narrow tunnel in total darkness. Following the only path ahead, I took a couple of turns every now and then, as I was led deeper and deeper to the unknown. Determined to reach its end though, I kept on going, ignoring all fears and thoughts of turning back. After a while though, my body was getting tired. I had been crawling through that tunnel for more than half an hour by then, and my muscles were starting to ache. There was nothing more that I wanted than to be able to get up and stretch my whole body, but in the tight confines of that passageway, All I could do was occasionally extend my arms and feet once in a while. As it would turn out, I soon ended up finding a room at that point. Initially, due to the constant darkness, I didn't know that I was approaching an end to the tunnel. It was only when I put my hand forward and felt no concrete bottom ahead of me did I realize that I finally encountered an opening that led to a larger space. And turning on the flashlight to better see what I found, I was surprised to see a fairly large room, big enough for me to stand in. But it wasn't the size of the room that attracted my attention. Instead, it was what the room was made of that drew my interest. The walls, the ceiling, and the floor were not made out of concrete. They weren't made out of wood, steel, or any common material either. Instead, they were made out of a fleshy-like material, not too far off from human skin, with hair follicles protruding out of them. Seeing this unnerved me, but I couldn't keep my eyes off of it. Shocked and transfixed, I stared at each corner of the room and soon noticed that it was expanding and contracting with each second, as if it was breathing. It made me wonder if the room was alive. The sight of large walls of flesh breathing was strange and frightening. It wasn't natural and it shouldn't exist. The thought of such a thing existing made me wonder what else I would find in here. For a moment, I contemplated what to do. I wasn't sure if the room was safe, especially since it was clearly alive. I didn't want to go into it and explore. However, no sooner after thinking that, I noticed that there was something else on the other side of the room. Shining my light there, I couldn't help but feel excitement suddenly hit me as I realized there was another opening there, another path that I could take. This left me with no other option than to get in the room, quickly cross it, and get into that tunnel. Luckily for me, the distance to the other opening was only around 10 feet. Not trusting the room, I decided that I was going to make a quick sprint to the other side and up into the other entrance. There was no telling what the room did the moment that I stepped into it, but such a living room can't possibly be friendly to intruders. And due to the narrowness of the tunnel that I was initially in, I found it difficult to maneuver myself to get out. Because of that, I went into the room head first, with my arms shielding my head as I crawled out and fell down on the floor. As I landed, I felt my body hit a good number of the protruding hair follicles. This seemed to cause the room to react, as I suddenly felt everything shake around me. And like I feared, the room wasn't very fond of me. Getting up, I looked around and saw that the walls were expanding and contracting faster than they had been before. At that moment, I was tempted to pull myself back up and get back into the tunnel that I had just left. But I managed to think clearly and control my fear long enough to realize that to go back, it would result in me being trapped in there forever. There was no more place to go in that tunnel and I would just end up back in the elevator. My only salvation was making it across the room to the other side. Moving towards it, I felt the shaking around me intensify as I went. Allowing myself to look around the room, I saw with great horror that the walls and ceiling were expanding before closing in on me. This encouraged me to go even faster, which was hard when the room around me was constantly shaking. I ended up tripping a couple of times as I went, crawling for a few seconds before getting up again. Luckily, I soon reached the wall where the opening was and wasted no time trying to get in. Placing my phone in first so that it would provide me with light, I then lifted myself up and got into the tunnel. Doing my best to glance behind me once I was inside, I managed to see the walls expand more and more until I could no longer see the room from the opening. All that was left was a wall of flesh that blocked the entrance. Letting out a deep sigh of relief, I allowed myself to relax for a second. Turning off the flashlight, I then lay on the cold concrete floor of the tunnel and I got a few moments of rest. The adrenaline was now fading away from me, and I felt more exhausted than I was earlier. After a while, I decided that I had had enough rest, and I willed my sore body to continue the monotonous task of crawling in the darkness. Many minutes of uneventful crawling occurred before I had encountered my next problem. As I moved along the tunnel, I eventually bumped into a wall in front of me. At first, I feared that I may have reached a dead end, and that all my traveling had been for nothing. However, after feeling around, I soon noticed that there was no wall to my left and right. Turning on my flashlight, I soon saw that I had actually found a split in the tunnel. Further inspection of the paths on both sides revealed that each path had multiple tunnel openings throughout their length. This left me with a decision to make. Which way should I go? Deciding to rest as I contemplated what to do, I couldn't help but let my thoughts wander as I laid there on the cold tunnel floor. I didn't seem to be getting any closer to freedom, and the further that I went, the worse my situation seemed to become. Dejected, but left with no other option, I decided to continue. I had gotten that far already, after all. There was no use stopping now. Choosing to take the path on the right, I moved forward until I got to the 6th tunnel opening. Then, hoping that I made the right decision, I pushed on, continuing my earlier routine of moving through the tunnel in the darkness. While crawling, I slowly noticed that the tunnel was beginning to slope up. This sent a wave of excitement to me. The entire time that I had been there, the tunnel had always remained flat. But now it was going up, and I hoped that it meant that I chose right and I was finally going back to the surface. As I pushed forward, emboldened by the good news, I soon felt that the angle of the slope seemed to increase the farther I go. At first, this didn't worry me, but as the angle kept on rising, I soon found it difficult to crawl. Eventually, it reached to the point that my movement was extremely slow, and I had to fight against gravity and prevent myself from sliding down. To my great relief, I soon reached an area where the slope ended, and the tunnel once more was perfectly flat. From there, I took a brief rest and I allowed myself to breathe before continuing on. However, I was only able to move a couple of feet before stopping again. Looking ahead, I saw a faint light in the distance. Unsure what this could mean, I hesitated as I crawled forward. Slowly making my way to the light, I soon saw the outline of an opening in front of me. Immediately, I knew what it meant. There must have been another room. Remembering what I found in the last room, I was a bit hesitant at the idea of entering another one. It didn't help that this room was emitting some light, something that was uncommon in these tunnels. I then remembered what could be causing that light and if that was a good thing. Because of my fears, I moved towards the opening cautiously, before stopping and peering out to see what was in there. As I took my first glance, I felt my body freeze in fear. There, sitting in the center of a large room, was a gigantic monster, with a large, bulbous body that had dozens of eyes facing every direction. Connected on the lower half of this monster were hundreds of tentacles of various sizes that moved and shifted constantly as if they were restless. Looking at this terrible being and wondering what such a thing was doing here, I allowed my eyes to wander around the room to see what was illuminating it. To my surprise, I saw hundreds of monitors lining the walls, each one depicting some kind of video. Briefly looking back to the monster before turning my attention back to the monitors, I soon realized that its multiple eyes were watching these monitors. Focusing on one of the monitors, it showed footage of a man sitting behind a study table. Watching for a few seconds, I saw that the man was staring at his laptop and typing intently. Confused, I looked at another monitor to see that it showed a woman lying on bed, sleeping. Turning my gaze to another monitor, I then saw footage of another man as he sat and used his phone. As I glanced at each screen, all I could see were people doing random tasks, people living their lives. people who didn't seem to know that they were being watched. Laying there amazed and frightened, I couldn't help but wonder if that thing was just there to spy on people. It would seem so, and I wondered how many people it had eavesdropped on and for how long it had been doing this. The thought of something as horrendous as that monster watching me without my knowledge, it sent a shiver down my spine. As I kept on studying the monitors, my gaze suddenly focused on one in particular. Looking on in horror, I saw a live feed of myself displayed there, lying in the tunnel with a shocked expression on my face. I stared on to see the same terrified look that I had at that moment be reflected on the monitor. I didn't know how it was possible, but it was there. Realizing that this meant that the monster would know where I was, I started crawling backwards and away from the opening. I knew that I needed to get away before it noticed that I was right there near it. There was no telling what it would do to me if it saw me so close to its lair, and I didn't want to find out. Unfortunately for me, before I could move far enough away, one of the monster's smaller tentacles suddenly rushed in front of me. Entering the tunnel at great speed, it moved closer and closer towards me. Desperately, I tried to move back faster, but it was to no avail. Before I knew it, the tentacle was able to wrap around my arm and pull me out of the tunnel. Screaming and feeling complete fear overtake me, I tried to resist. Like prey caught by a predator, I was desperately trying to escape, but I couldn't. Its grip on me was too strong, and I was lifted into the room and toward the many eyes of the huge creature. Hanging by the arm as I stared at it, my whole body shook in fright. I could see many of its eyes focus on me, with their gaze feeling like sharp daggers. I didn't know what it wanted from me or what its intentions were with me. At the time, I assumed that whatever they were, they couldn't be good for me. That's why I was caught by surprise when the creature gently placed me down on the floor. Afraid and confused, I dared not to move and instead stood there and stared. Staring up at the monster, I watched as it lifted one of its larger tentacles. Fearing the worst, I closed my eyes, thinking that it was going to slam it against me. But nothing happened. And daring to open my eyes, I looked back up at the monster to see that it held the tentacle out, extending it towards the other side of the room. Following its tentacle, I soon noticed that it was pointing towards a tunnel opening on the other side of the room. Staring back at it, I saw a couple of its eyes look at me, before glancing towards the opening. Hesitantly, I moved towards where it was pointing, wondering if it was some sort of trick. I was afraid that it would suddenly attack me once my guard was down. But then I thought, why would it? It was clearly stronger than me and it could easily crush me without any effort. It didn't need me to lower my guard. So what did it mean? Was it playing with me or giving me a false sense of hope? Did it like to toy with its victims? Unsure and desperate to get out of there, I gave up on finding answers and soon started running towards the new tunnel opening. Moving as quickly as I could, I was soon standing by the entrance. And daring to look back, I turned my head towards the monster and saw that it remained where it was, although many of its eyes were staring at me. And then to my shock, I saw teeth appear. Sharp, huge, and white. Its teeth revealed themselves to me as it did its best to form a smile. Seeing this made my heart drop, and I couldn't tell if it was a friendly gesture or a threatening one. Shaken by what I saw, I quickly entered the tunnel and began crawling forward as far as I could. For a moment, I considered why the creature pointed me here. Was it all a trap? Will this tunnel lead me to my death? I wasn't sure, but I kept on going. During that time, anywhere seemed better than staying in that room with that monster. I kept on going for a few more minutes, only taking short breaks to catch my breath before moving on again. And during these breaks, I would check my phone, trying to see if I was getting any signal, but there was none, so I just continued to crawl. And by that point, I was completely exhausted, both physically and emotionally. This whole journey had taken its toll on me, and all I wanted was for it to end. Eventually, I began to see a light in the distance once more, this time brighter than the one earlier. Cautiously, I began moving forward, wondering what kind of room I would encounter now. However, as I got closer, I felt a fresh breeze brush against my face. This surprised me. And then getting closer, I heard the sound of birds chirping. Feeling excitement rush through me. I wondered if I really reached the end of this or if it was just some kind of cruel trick that these tunnels were playing on me. To my relief, it was the former. Reaching the opening, I was momentarily blinded by the brightness that I saw outside. I had to close my eyes for a moment, before blinking a couple of times as my vision adjusted to the light. After spending so much time in the dark, seeing sunlight felt different. Despite this, I had a wide smile on my face as I slid out of the tunnel and landed on the soft grass. And grabbing the grass with my hands and burying my face on it, I cheered and laughed. I had escaped. Looking up, I saw the blue sky above me. For a moment, I was confused. Last time I checked my phone, it told me that it was still supposed to be night. So why was the sun out? Only a few hours had passed by since I last checked it. It couldn't be. At least it didn't feel like it. Eventually, ignoring this anomaly, I got up and dusted myself off. Looking around to find out where I was, I suddenly frowned when I noticed that the tunnel that I had exited from was gone. It seemed to have just disappeared, as I stood in the middle of an empty field alone. Shaking my head and giving up trying to understand the tunnels, I then tried to find out where I was. Looking at the distance, I was happy to see that my city was only a few miles away. Laughing, I let out a smile of relief knowing that I had escaped. As I walked away from that field and tried to figure out a way back home, I made a pledge to myself to never take the elevator again.